Hello, this is the Jay Show, and this is Dr. Jay Smith here in London with Hatun Tash, who we are now looking at episode number 4, where we're unpacking what Dan Gibson, we're going to be introducing Dan Gibson now, because he is the one that actually does the most work on the Qiblas, and we've now moved into the Qibla section. What we're going to do, we're going to look at some of these mosques. We're not going to look at all 65 because it's too many, but we're certainly going to look at the earliest ones because they're the most important. Now, before we get into look at them, can you help me, Hatun? How did he come to his conclusions on their direction? What did he look for to find the Qibla, like the Qibla walls? We saw a picture of it earlier. I can go back to it. In fact, I'll show it to you what we're talking about.
That will be helpful.
If you just put up on the screen again, you will see the mihrab there on the upper left-hand side.
Yeah.
That's the mihrab that is used today.
Yeah.
Every mosque will have one of those.
Yeah.
And the ancient ones would just have walls that would have.
Mihrab has been introduced in 708. So every mosque which built after 708, it has the mihrab. So from mihrab, it's very easy to chase back where is the direction of the prayer, like where the people are facing.
And what you notice is that the early mosques are not like churches. They're not built the same way that churches are built. Churches are built like this, long and narrow.
Yes, because we sit next to each other in a long
queue. And so this would be the front of the church, this would be the back, and people would be facing this way in a church.
Yeah.
A mosque is built this way.
Because,
why is it built with wide walls?
Because brotherhood is very important. When Muslims pray, they stand next to each other and then they have to touch each other. So
in a long tuk. So it's completely different structure than a church.
Yes.
A church would be this way, mosques are this way.
Yeah.
So you have everybody standing next to each other with their feet standing. And I remember when I've been to mosque, when I used to pray many years ago, when I used to do this for my contextualization, there would be a man there with a little stick in his hand, tapping our toes so that we would have our toes would touch the other toes.
Brotherhood is very important.
Not only that, they would believe that if you're touching that many more toes, that much more barakah you get. It's like a magical mathematical formula. So they would have long, wide walls rather than long and narrow. It'd be wide and shallow. So that's what he looked for, the long, wide walls. And of course, he's only interested in this wall. Now,
he's not interested in the wall. He's interested to find the mihrab from this.
He wanted the mihrab.
This shape.
Now, I wanted to, there's been many Muslims who have said, and I'm looking for the page, if you could find it for me, what he used, what kind of he used aster, and if you could find it for me, maybe while I'm talking about it. Many Muslims have been upset with Dan Gibson because they think that once he got to these places, he just used Google Maps. He was very careful not to use Google Maps. For one very good reason. Google Maps are just too inaccurate. Google Maps look down at the earth, and there's a diagram that he has here in his book on it, which shows you that when you look using Google Maps, it looks like at a flat earth.
Yep.
And the earth is curved. So when you're looking straight down and you try to get GPS coordinates, they would be off by a number of degrees. So he used something that was much more sophisticated using ArchNet that we talked about earlier. But not just ArchNet, he used Aster program. Okay, I'm going to take the book and I'm going to show you what he said. It's on, for those of you who get the book, it's on page 74.
No, page not 7, 120 something. Page
124. I'm sorry. What's that 74 there? Oh, that's something else. It's page 124, footnote number 74. So page 124, this is what he would do. And rather than using Google Map, he would look at the GPS coordinates of the waypoints. And what he would do, he'd take the GPS coordinates of the waypoints and enter them into Earth Data's Aster data. It's called ASTER. The Aster data has been validated by the U.S. Geological Survey and U.S. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. But if you want to use Aster yourself, you have to get permission. So he had to get permission to use this. And it's much more, it's very much more not only authoritative, it's much more accurate because
reliable.
It follows the contour of the Earth.
Yeah.
So it assumes, and what it does, it has geostationary satellites that are going above the Earth all the time at the same altitude. So when they're looking at distances, they're always looking at it from the same altitude all the way around the Earth. And that's why he was able to get exact coordinates. And that's why in this book now, he has been able to give us all the coordinates. So
Yeah.
what we're going to do is we're going to look at these coordinates, are we not? Now,
Yes.
to be fair, in order to describe them to us. So on the documentary that he put out last year in 2016, and even the pictures that he uses here for his maps, he did use Google Maps
As an illustration.
to only illustrate to us.
Yeah.
And that's where many Muslims got confused. When they looked on the documentary and said, oh, this is just Google Maps.
Yeah.
Google Maps, you need Google Maps to illustrate it. That's nothing that more than for illustration. The Google Maps was not used
Yeah.
to get the coordinates
In,
itself.
in his book, page 124 and 125, he gives us the details how we come to the conclusion, which is the direction of the prayer. And he gives us helpful tips and also unhelpful tips. For example, he says, do not use the prayer wall, those kind of things. So it's very helpful to just, for those who are going to buy the book, it's helpful to make sure you give extra attention to the page 124 and 125.
That should answer your questions for you, because we do know that some Muslims, at Speaker's Corner especially, have come to us and say, this is nothing more than Google Maps, we don't trust it, therefore his calculations are all off. Now let's take a look at the scribe. And what I want to do is I want to put the slides up with these different mosques. Not all of them, they're not exhaustive. We're only doing about maybe 20 or 30 of the 65 he looked at. We may do about half the ones he looked at, just to give you an example. Let's start with the very first one, which is the Mosque of the Two Qiblas, the Qiblatain Mosque. This is the Mosque of Two Qiblas, and it was erected in 626. And it was changed to Mecca, but it always was known as the Mosque of the Two Qiblas, and this was always a curiosity. Why was it called the Mosque of the Two Qiblas? Well, in 1987, they did some excavations. And there you can see a picture looking from above, looking down onto the mosque. You can see where the green arrow is. That's the present day Qibla, and that's facing right towards Mecca. And so this Mosque of the Two Qiblas was always a mystery until they did some digging around the outsides. And as they were digging down, they came across another wall, a completely other wall on the left side. Look where the red arrow is. Yeah. And that's the wall, that's the earlier wall that is facing completely, almost completely the other direction. It's facing north, northwest. So here's the Qibla in Medina, or what was then Yathrib.
It's in Medina, yeah.
And it's dated to 626, so by that time it was called Medina. And if you look on the map there, you can see, built in 626, we don't know the degree of error because we haven't been able to get there. We can't get to that mosque. He's not able to go physically there and do the
But regarding the direction he was given, it is towards the Petra and towards the Jerusalem.
It looks like straight towards Petra and Jerusalem right behind it.
Yeah.
So that would be a fascinating, that's the first one we see. Then,
so that's like approximately 180 degrees missing.
Almost 180 degrees, you're right. Now let's look at the second one that's very important. Now this is the Guangzhou, or what is today known as Canton in China. As far away as Canton in China. Go ahead, why don't you unpack that one?
So mosque is built in China in 627.
Yeah.
And according to Islamic tradition, it was Muhammad's uncle who built the mosque, and during his trade he built that. When you look at the directions of the mosque, we see it does not face towards Mecca. It misses the Mecca with 7 degrees.
If you look at those four, and we're going to be doing this with every one of these slides, you'll see there are 4 dials at the top. Each one of those dials, Dan Gibson, these are from his book, they are the actual mosque on the left. The next would be Petra. Then the following one would be where Mecca is and where Jerusalem is. So when you look at this,
so you see the proper, not coordinates, proper degrees.
Now the degree of error for Petra would be 2.81. The degree of error for Jerusalem would be 4.86. And the degree of error for Mecca would be 7.11.
Yes.
So obviously Petra is the closest.
Yeah, it's much closer to Petra than Mecca.
Now you say, wait, China. Look at China. Look at this map here. This is a Google map. Look how far away China is from Mecca to Petra. Can you
Yeah.
see then, by the time you get to the Middle East, there's 600 miles difference
Yeah.
between those two lines. The red
Yes.
line going through Petra and the black line going through Mecca. And the red line does not go through Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It's very exact, 2.81 degrees. It's going straight through Petra.
And a helpful thing is to remember is if today our dear Muslim friends wants to go to China and check the mosque out, Qibla is still facing to Petra.
It is still there, and this is the great thing.
2017.
Quite
still
a few of
facing
these
to
have
Petra.
never been corrected.
Yeah.
They are still there. So from 627, remember, Muhammad's still living.
Yeah.
He died in 632. This is still while Muhammad's living. This is 3 years after the Qibla was canonized towards Mecca. That it should, therefore, you might say, well, then it's so far away. They can understand why. This is 3 years after the Qibla, so maybe that's why they hadn't changed it yet to Mecca. But you might want to ask, what was our Qibla doing way over in China? We're going to come back to that at the very end. We're going to explain
But
that.
we know, like Muhammad's uncle traveled there, and he was
According to tradition.
according to Islamic
I don't think
tradition.
Muhammad's uncle ever traveled there.
Yeah, according to Islamic tradition, Muhammad's uncle traveled there.
And we'll tell you what
yeah.
we think is going on and what Dan Gibson is going on. So let's now go to another one. And this is the third one. And this one now is in India. So we've gone from Medina to Guangzhou in China. Now
yeah.
we've come to India. And there in India, go ahead, Hatun, why don't you unpack this one?
So this mosque is Chairman Juma Masjid in India. It is built in 629 and it is facing to Petra. And degree of error is 75 degree. So it misses the Mecca with 75 degree, which is
Look
a
how
lot.
close it is to Petra.
Yeah.
0.26 degree.
0.26.
It's even a quarter of a degree. I mean, you can't get any closer. Look how far away India is. India is on the other side of the world.
And remember, Mecca is 75 degree off.
75 degrees off.
Yeah.
It's not Jerusalem. It's not
It's
Mecca.
close to the Petra.
It's very close to Petra. That is still existing today. The Qibla has not changed, and that's why the building is still there.
Okay, we don't know
I'm
when.
sorry.
Sorry,
it
we
has
don't
been.
know. We don't know when did they rebuild the mosque for the facing the Kaaba.
But this is
facing the
in
Mecca.
South India, in Kerala,
Yeah.
in the very tip of India. Now let's go to Syria. The Jami Hama al-Kabir Mosque in Syria. So we've done from Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
we've then moved to China, we moved to India, now we're in Syria.
Yeah. This mosque is built in 637. It is facing towards Petra. Degree or like it is 25 degree of Mecca. 25 degree of
25 degrees.
Mecca.
It's only 0.61 degrees off Petra, less,
Yeah.
Just a half a degree off of Petra there in Syria. And it can't be Jerusalem because it's 7.17 degrees from Jerusalem. So it's obviously, this one is directly towards Petra.
Yeah.
Now we go back to Egypt. This is the mosque that Creswell and Fehervadi had noticed back in 1905. And when we get back to Fustat Mosque, which is just outside of Cairo,
Yeah.
in the garrison town there, what do we know about this one?
So it's rebuilt in 826 to
Which
face
is the 9th century.
Yeah, which is the 9th century, facing towards Mecca.
So it had to rebuilt to face it correctly.
Yes.
But originally, according to the floor plan, the original floor plan that's still there, you can see that it's facing Petra as early as 642. When we look at the Fustat Mosque, you can see it from an air looking down onto it.
Yeah.
That it has been rebuilt, but the original floor plan is still there. Now
And also remember, Creswell talks about this mosque as well, and he talks about it's not facing to Mecca.
It's right. He noticed it when he originally. That was back over 100 years ago, 1905. Dome of the Rock is pretty exciting. We've got it up there on the slide there. Built in 690, or some people say 691.
Yeah.
Between 690 and 691 by Abdul al-Malik.
Yeah.
Huge dome. We're going to talk more about this later on. But it has no Qibla.
Islamic tradition tells us in the time of Ibn Zubayr, during the civil war, he destroyed the Qibla. That's why it doesn't have the Qibla.
Okay. Now, the building we're looking at right now is not the original building. In fact, I did a debate back in 1997 or 98 with Abdul Rahman Green over this building, and I mentioned then it didn't have any building. I'd been told that by Dr.
You mentioned that it doesn't. He mentioned.
I mentioned it didn't have a Qibla.
Yeah.
And he tried to say it did have a Qibla, and he tried to say that the Qibla is right there on the portico, the southern portico, because it mentions Surah 2, ayah 145 to 149, and then above it on the dome, around just below the golden part, is inscriptions from Surah 17, ayah 1, that talks about Muhammad going from the great mosque to the farthest mosque. And I said, well, you know, the problem you have with that is that building you're looking at was built in 1876. Not a little over 100 years ago. So proof is that this doesn't have a Qibla. And what we're going to show you is we now know where the Qibla is because we're going to see it a little later. But what we do know is the Qibla that it is facing Petra. Here we're going to find, I'll show you what I mean. When you come down, we're going to show you this later, on a later slide. So now let's go to the Humayna Mosque in Jordan. In the Humayna Mosque, in Jordan in 699. Now, Hatun doesn't know what I'm going to do with the Dome of the Rock, and so she's sitting there quizzically kind of questioning me, saying, hold on a minute, Jay, do you know what you're talking about? And that's fine, because you don't know where I'm going to go with this, but you'll see once we get to another mosque that's a little later. We're now in 699. Okay, help me here. Why is this significant? This is in Jordan. It's the Humayna Mosque.
Yeah.
And we have the four dials up there.
It is built in 699.
Yeah.
And it is today, if you want to go and find the direction of the Qibla, you can do that because it is in that form, and direction of the Qibla is towards Petra.
7.33 degree of error.
Yet,
Jerusalem is 23.
Yet it miss of the Mecca 133 degrees.
33 degrees off. So this is completely off. Now I want you to take a look. If you look at that picture there, can you see there are two lines? The red line is the earlier mosque. That's the Humayna Mosque. That's going towards Petra. The little one is then at the bottom, where with Mecca going in blue, is what they built later on. They had to build this later on to get a Qibla that's going towards Mecca. That's a much later rendition. But you can see, first of all, you can see that the original mosque is still there, and that's why it's very clear that it's completely off by 133 degrees. Right, now we come to the Amman Mosque in Jordan. This is the one that's right there in the capital city, Amman itself.
Yeah.
Take a look at it and tell me, unpack that for me.
So it is built in 701 AD, and it's in Jordan. And when you look at the map, you can see actually it towards the Petra. Mm-hmm. Qibla is towards Petra, and degree of error is only 11 degree, and it is 22 degree off from the Mecca.
But take a look at Jerusalem. The degree of error for Jerusalem is 70. Now, this has helped because a lot of people say, well, Jerusalem, Petra, they're so close together. It's obvious that they're really trying to hit Jerusalem, but they hit Petra. But here you can see this is not anywhere near Jerusalem.
Yeah, if you look at the degrees, 70 versus 11, that's...
Yeah. And that's because
pretty bad.
Jordan is very close to Jerusalem, and Amman is very close to Petra, but it's almost coming at 90-degree difference. In this case, 70 degrees. Yeah. So that really eradicates that response that we get from a lot of Muslims, that really these are meant to be to Jerusalem, not when you get to this mosque.
And it is never built again. It is never built for the direction of the Qibla that can face Mecca. It is still facing the Petra.
It's still facing Petra. It's never been rebuilt. It's still pristine. You can go, if you don't believe us or don't believe Dan Gibson, go to Amman and take a look at yourself. Now we go down to Yemen. We're going down to Sana'a, the Grand Mosque in Sana'a, and there we see it's 705. Unpack that one for me.
So it's built in 705 in Yemen. And when you look at the directions, you see actually it is facing the Petra again. And it's like only just
less than half a degree.
Yeah, 0.36. And it is missing of Mecca 8 degree. That's a lot of degree.
Yeah, and coming down from Yemen, you can see why it is also very close. In fact, it's even closer to Jerusalem. But from way down in Yemen, you can understand why that is the case. Let's come up to Israel, and let's go to Kirbat al-Minya Mosque. This one, if you could unpack that one for us, built in 706.
It's built in 706, and again, it's another mosque approximately 80 years after approximately 8 years after Qibla has been canonized, built, and facing to Petra. Facing to Petra, it's like
0.8 degrees, less than 1 degree.
Less than 1 degree, and it's 22 degree off of the Mecca.
So it's very clear this is not to Mecca.
Yeah.
This is pointing towards Petra. If here's another picture of it from looking at it, you can see very clearly that the Petrin in red is very much closer to what. Now, this is, I'm going to stop right here for a bit because we are now in up to 706. Remember what you said earlier, that the Qibla was canonized in 624.
Yes.
Have you noticed that every mosque, let's look at the slide there. I want to show you these set of slides, that every mosque up until 706 have Qiblas facing Petra. So take a look. Now we're just going to pull back each slide one after another.
We've got only a couple of mosques which we don't know where it is Qibla is facing, but rest of them it's all facing to Petra.
Up until 706.
Yes.
And what we can say is not one mosque is facing Mecca.
And that's approximately 80 years after the death of Muhammad. Sorry, 8 years after Qibla has been canonized.
Okay, let's look at the slides again and let's pull back from each one. So here's the first one. Now just take a look. Let's look at this slide here. Now you can see these are all the Qiblas that we've looked at so far. Look and see where they're coming in. This is looking as you get closer. In every case, all the slides come right into Petra.
Yeah, and those pictures are taken from Dan Gibson's movie.
This is coming to the sacred
Qibla.
city.
Yeah.
This is coming to, now we just look back and pull back and show what we're talking about. Guangzhou, Baghdad, Wasit, Kufa, Damascus, Amman, Jerusalem, Fustat, and Sana'a. All of them are completely facing Petra. They're not facing Jerusalem, and they're certainly not pointed towards Mecca.
So, like, I don't think we can say it's like zero. It's like exactly the point of the Mecca, but it's only missing a couple of degrees.
Okay, let's look at the slide. I want to show you this slide here.
In lots of occasions, it's only less than a couple of degrees.
Dan Gibson decided to answer that question you're bringing up. And he looked, just looking down on Petra, and you see that dotted black circle?
Yeah.
Those are the 45-mile circle. That circle is the 45-mile circumference. So that's 45 miles. Take a look at them. They all come within 45, except for two. Except for two, all of them come within that 45-mile circumference. That's the solid one. Then you get to the dotted one. They all come within the dotted one. Now, that means all the Petrin Qiblas, we've only looked at 4 or 5 or 6 of them, all the 17 Petrin Qiblas are within the dotted circle, proving how accurate they were.
Yep. Even
from thousands and thousands of miles away, as we cast with Guangzhou and, of course, India.
I think we would be questioning if we had mosques, they were all over like 5 degrees off from everywhere, but they are all very close to the, like it looks like it is intentionally built to look towards Petra.
For Petra.
Yeah.
Okay, now we get to 706. We're still in 706, and we get the first mosque that's not facing Petra. This is somewhere in between Petra and Mecca.
So Petra is here, Mecca is here. Direction of the Qibla is somewhere in the middle.
It's almost halfway. We're going to see exactly how these are all also facing exactly the same way.
Yeah.
But these are what we call the in-between Qibla. So this is a second Qibla now. This is something that's, and we're going to see why later on. So this is in between, not Petra in the north or Mecca in the south. It's somewhere about halfway in between. You can look at the degree of error, 27, 37, and 22 from Jerusalem. Then we get this mosque in 708, back to Petra again. So in 708, we're coming up to the Masjid-i-Tariq Khana in Iran.
It's in Iran, and it's facing to Petra. It is 22 degrees off from Mecca.
So obviously it's not Mecca at all, and we're in a completely new country now. This is Iran. Let's go back to Israel, let's go back to Jerusalem, and now we get to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And when you look at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built in 709, all right? This one is built in 709. Tell me about that one there.
It is in Jerusalem, and it is facing to Petra.
3.43 degrees off, Jerusalem would be itself, and therefore the Mecca degree of error would be 12.31. But I'm going to show you one. Remember I said I was going to come back to the Dome of the Rock? And you kind of smiled. You didn't know where I was going to go with it. So look at the next slide. Because when you look at the next slide, take a look. Dome of the Rock is built in 691.
Yeah.
or 690. Al-Aqsa Mosque is built in 709.
Yes.
But they're all built on the same citadel. And when you look at the citadel from the air, you will see that not only is the Dome of the Rock, but the entire citadel, including Al-Aqsa, is facing Petra. So really, if you really want to be technical about it, the Dome of the Rock does have a Qibla. The citadel it's built on was facing in one direction.
Yeah.
And you can only see this from looking down from it from above. So there you can see the citadel of Al-Aqsa, which is in the foreground, Dome of the Rock, which is in the middle, and the entire wall that goes around it is facing Petra.
Yeah.
In 691, in 709. Okay, now we're still in 709, and we come to the Jami al-Umayyi al-Kabir Mosque in Damascus.
Okay. Just a side note to remember, 708 is the date when mihrab has been introduced to the mosques.
Okay, just so explain to the listeners what you mean by that.
Mihrab is the sign where the direction of the Qibla is.
That's right.
So it's been introduced to the mosque in 708.
So 708, around this time that we're looking at right now, the mihrabs are now being installed into the mosque, so people know exactly where their prayer is.
Yes.
Okay. Now we're in 709.
And now we are on 709 in place called Surya, Damascus. We are looking at the Jamil Umayyi al-Kabir. And it's, as I said, it's built in 709, and it is facing towards Petra.
It's facing.
Oh, sorry.
It's in between.
It's in between.
This is
like not Petra here, Mecca here. It's somewhere in the middle.
It's off Petra by 20 degrees. It's off Mecca by 8 degrees, and it's in this one place. It's 1.75.
Yes.
So that's fascinating because this is the second one now we've seen of this in between Qibla.
Yes.
It's not the Petran Qibla. It's not the Meccan Qibla.
So we are beginning of 8th century, and there is something happening. Mosques are not facing the Petra, either Mecca, but somewhere in the between.
Okay, now we get to the Kirbat al-Mafjar Mosque in Jericho, back to Israel. This is 714. Unpack this one for me.
So it's in Israel, built in 714. Qibla is facing to Petra.
Okay. And it's obvious that this one, facing towards Petra, we're back there again. 714. Now we're going to end there because we need to wrap this all up until we'll continue this looking at Lebanon next with the next episode, episode 5. But Hatun, have you seen why we're doing this?
We are doing this because besides we love Muslims, Muslims are praying towards Mecca for 100 years, 1,000 years.
Well, I would say 1,300 years.
1,300 years. And direction of the Qibla have been officialized for them in 624.
Supposedly 1,400 years ago.
Yet when we look at the archaeological evidence for the direction of the Qibla, we see there is something wrong. They are not facing the place which traditionally Muslims claimed.
So right now, up until 714, we have seen now 2 Qiblas.
Yeah.
Petra in the north, and then somewhere just south of it in the south, but not Mecca. So far, we haven't found one mosque that is facing Mecca. That should trouble all of you Muslims.
Yeah.
And you can see as we're going to pick this up and continue it with the next episode, there's a reason why, and we're going to show you why. But hold off until we do that. This is Jay and Hatun here in London. Over and out.